And
We're going there. I mean, this is literally it. So, like, the podcast has started, Barry. I hope you were ready. So, I guess part of what I wanted to talk about today was how you kind of got into photography. For people that don't know you, what was your entry like? How did you start as a photographer?
transparency is the key right off the bat. Let's do that.
Exactly. Because otherwise, like, we want people to know where you're coming from. Because otherwise, the context is helpful, really.
So I was in the architectural field doing some brand management for an architectural firm. They had an architectural photographer come through doing some work for them.
Yeah.
I kind of saw how she operated, and I thought, oh, this is good because I love the technical aspect of it and the pacing.
Yeah.
Slower, more methodical, and there were really very little humans involved. Julie, my wife, is actually the one who went to school as a major in photography. There was a period in time when she was in another career. She got burnt out with that career, as all Jamaicans do. We have multiple jobs. So I had a marketing agency while working for a company and whatever. So we said the next gig we get, buy a full kit, and then we'll see how it goes. Julie will see how it goes. So Julie gets the kit, but because the transition between analog and digital was so far, it was a little bit daunting for her. Pragmatic as I am, that piece of machinery has to make money. We just can't. So I basically got the camera, and my wife said I turned into the mad scientist. I was working out f-stops, lighting ratios and everything. And then there was a style that I specifically wanted to get, so I was trying to get there. Then I went to one event that Joe McNally was having in Philadelphia, where he was showing how to use off-camera flash, and that blew my mind. And then that was it. When it came to flash, I'm pretty much a self-taught photographer. I went to school for computer animation. Photography was not really in
the mix.
Yeah. Not something I was going to do. And then, because of the architectural background, it just kind of, in my head, that's the direction. Made sense.
Yeah, and it clicked for you.
Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about that, because I actually didn't know that you used to run an architecture firm and a marketing agency. That's news to me.
Yeah.
So really, your background must be from kind of like a consumer's point of view.
Yeah.
So with that kind of like insight, obviously it's going to inform some of the things we'll talk about soon, hopefully, but what was it like making that transition from being kind of behind the scenes into somebody actually taking the photographs and making those images?
Interesting enough, I think it honed my visual skills in identifying what looks good, what's polished, and the final image that I like. Because running the marketing agency and then doing the brand management for an architectural firm, you get to see a lot of imagery and styles. This is what makes good photographs. In the marketing agency that we ran, the issue a lot of times for us was the clients. We could design a beautiful website, a beautiful brochure, but the images just would not tell the same story, even of the client or the package we designed. So for us, we had all of that in our heads already. So when we went into the photography side, it was just a little bit easier to say, this is the style.
100%. So it sounds like really what you're trying to do is scratch your own itch. Like, the photographers are producing X, but Y is what we need.
Yeah.
And nobody's making Y. It's like, okay, then so you went into kind of experimenting phase, like, can I make this work? And you learn technical, which is amazing. Imagine that we've got a brand new commercial photographer. He's just come out of like college, university, or he's self-taught and he's built a portfolio. And you look at the work. Do you think that we focus too much on the craft and not enough on the application?
Well, the craft part of it, I think we have to all do the technique. We have to do that work.
Yeah.
And then it falls in the background, I think.
Yeah.
It's like the toolbox, I think, the craft. You have to build this toolbox. Once you've built it, you know which things to go in and pull. But you're not building it anymore. You just have the toolbox. I think that's probably Why would frame that?
Yeah, it's almost like musicianship. It's like you're learning a phrase, you're learning a new technique, you're
Yes.
learning a new lick, and then you go and perform, and it's part of your improvising. So it becomes like almost like you're developing a language that you can speak.
Yes.
Yeah, like, I totally get that. The thing that made me ask was that when you tend to find this a lot. Some of the best commercial photographers I know started out doing graphic design work, or they started out doing some other kind of visual work, and then realized that they weren't getting the things they wanted to like complement the designs. And I'm not trying to like apply a narrative, or just genuinely interested. Do you feel like people don't necessarily think about how the product is going to be used, how your photography is going to get used in content?
I would say the photographers that are commercial that are good do think of the context of where it's going to apply.
Yeah.
I think the mismatch is the client isn't willing to stretch to get that person to fit the narrative that we're creating with the story. So that's why it fell short. And I don't think it was the photographer, if he's trained, why the images weren't telling the story. I think it was not the right photographer.
Right, so allowing their budget to decide the visuals
Yeah,
rather than
yeah.
actually looking at the visual identity that they want
Yes,
and then producing something correct for it.
perfect. Because being in that design, we would always say, what's your story? Who's your audience? And then find a brand that is your brand that you, in essence, you would like to be.
Yeah.
And if you don't have your brand manual, which small companies don't like to do because it makes them think,
Yeah.
it dictates what that image is supposed to be: dark, moody, bright, colorful, subdued. It dictates all those things. Small companies tend to not like that because now they can't just jump and do anything.
To be honest, as a commercial photographer, you can also be afraid to be for somebody with a specific requirement as well. There's been a lot of times personally where I've wanted to take my work one direction, and then I've thought about my existing client base and thought, well, yeah, but would they like it? When actually it's part of our product development. But literally, the thing that we're selling is an image, and if we were trying to produce something a little bit different and we're trying to find the new market, you can't then be tied by, well, that client needs that and that client needs this, because I think it's a trap that I've definitely fallen into in the past, where you take a mid-market mindset.
Yeah.
Like, because of the fact that you want to stay local, you want to work with the businesses around you, you produce a style that's palatable to like a range of companies. And if you're not careful, that can end up making you a very Me Too offering.
And I do understand the financial aspect of why photographers in the beginning do that. I'm not here to say you can't do that or no, we're not. And to be honest, I'm still working on stuff. I don't have it all worked out. We're still working on stuff. So even though I say these things, I don't have all the answers either. This is just how I've approached the path and what's been working for me so far. And fortunately, we've had mentors or people that have been in the industry for a while kind of hone us and push us a certain way, help us to get where we are. So we don't know everything. We just know some of the things, how to get through some of the things.
Exactly. And when nobody's expecting perfection, like one of the main reasons that the format of the podcast has changed a little bit is because of that. I want people to feel like they're not being interviewed to give a perfect answer. It's just talking about your experience as a creative. That's it. So when you're approaching like a multi-decade career or even just a 5-year career, people learn different things than somebody that's just starting out. And sometimes I want people to see both sides of the struggle. But frankly, the reason we're talking today is, one, obviously, we only met for the first time yesterday in person. Like we're currently in Scotland, like in the middle of nowhere. It's amazing. But watching the way that you talk about the business side of photography was really interesting to me. And that only comes with experience. And frankly, it's experience that isn't easy for even experienced photographers in mid-market to access. And like you said, you're not a fully formed human, you're not perfect, like nobody is, but it's just interesting to see how you navigate those challenges. And for me, when I look at your work, especially some of the work you do for hospitality, it's incredible. Like the hotel work that you do, the architecture work, it really is evocative. And that technical element that you talk about, everything is perfect. Like I can analyze one of your photographs and see it as being completely flawless from a technical point of view. And you may not look at it and see that, but as somebody that knows my technical and knows that, I look at it and think, good grief, how did he do it? How did he do that? Because it's not something that's inside my skill set. And the thing you were talking about before about differentiating your work and trying to be for somebody, not getting caught in the trap of just being like mid-market and kind of charging your amount and being a broad brush, being niche, being specific. Like I really see that in your work, because for every company that needs like a technically perfect image, there's one that will be looking for something different. And that's kind of a relief for me. I don't know how you find it. So in terms of doing that, obviously you started out as an architect and you've developed this very kind of technically clean style with a very like luxurious kind of feel to it. What drew you in that direction?
That's just the style I like. There's some people like it brighter and more colorful. I do like things. Maybe it's my Commonwealth background. I like it subdued and a little deeper. Even though I was brought up in the Caribbean, I'm Jamaican, so you would think my images would be of that bright, cheery, but something about that style. Maybe it's because of the Dutch masters and how they lit things, which I translate into my architectural photography almost similarly. The contrast, maybe why I like that style.
They're more even, but then the light does describe a lot. Like when you look at the work, you can tell that you're working from a dark base, and then like with highlights to kind of fill in, and that's kind of why I say technically perfect. Because when you look at an image that you make, especially of an interior, I find that they're amazing because no room is that evenly lit, and yet that specifically lit, it's really interesting. But that said, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the technical side. In a previous episode of this podcast, we talked to Emma Alexander. She runs a production company called Wizen, and she does an awful lot with photography groups in the UK. Amazing person, really generous with her time. And we came onto the topic of licensing and usage. Because whether we like to admit it or not, there are some unfair practices that tend to happen in agencies. And one of the ways that those things propagate is because photographers don't realize how the licensing system is supposed to work. So I kind of wanted to hear from your perspective, like how important is that side of the business for you? Like, is it a huge proportion of your income, a small one? Like, can you talk me through the process of what licensing a photograph is?
So for me, the licensing especially for hospitality, is maybe a slightly different in some. I can almost have perpetual license to a client, knowing that in 5-6 years they're going to redo that, and those images only really have a lifespan of 5 years. If I'm doing if I'm doing lifestyle, maybe I'll do that, but it's mostly for the interiors. For the architects, kind of similar. It's a perpetual license to use the image, but I still own the copyright. Yes, licensing is important, especially if a third party comes in and wants to use that image. Now that's, for me, that's different. And the licensing, you have to take in consideration where in the market is your client. Are they mid-market? Are they low market? Are they regional? Are they international? Kind of do a little bit of research on the client. What's their profit margins like? They're a huge company. They know the value of your image and how much money they will make by having the correct image. What sometimes they will do is they have, and I didn't know this, another agency that I use to help me bid, wonderful machine, helped me to realize they have 2 contracts sometimes. The up-and-coming, hungry photographer, they'll push 1, 2, and if they bite,
Too late. You booked it.
Right. And I'm not saying to these hungry photographers don't do that, because you have to keep your lights on, pay the bills. And I'll probably get a little bit of backlash for this part, is that the other photographers say, no, they shouldn't do that. Okay. When the other photographers start to foot my bill and pay my light, then they have all right to tell me what to do. Before that, you got to just live with what I'm doing. Because just like you, I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to live. When I get to that level where I can be specific about the client, then I can sort of come around to the community. But the community isn't paying my bills. So I have to do what I have to do to survive. We hope that the photographers that are up and coming will see the value eventually to change to a reasonable form of licensing, so that we are viewed the same way as musicians. They're licensing their music for a certain amount of time. I think if photographers think of themselves as musicians and writers, then they will understand licensing probably a little better as artists.
That makes sense. Just purely for the most basic level, can you just give me a simple overview of what licensing is? Like, let's say somebody's used to being a gig photographer where you would go in, you'd be paid for your time, and then you leave and the client uses the images. Like, what is licensing? To somebody that's in that situation, can you explain on a base level what is image licensing?
Well, how I break it down is you have a creative licensing and a kind of day rate kind of mixed sometime in one, and it will say my day rate and creative licensing for 10 images that I shoot in a day. My typical shot list for days on interiors is 10, like about 10. So then there's a figure mark to that. Whether you break it down in terms of how long they're going to have the image, you can say it's $400 or $500 per image, and that will be the licensing that they will have for X. And you can write in that same contract: social media, website, brochure. And then, depending on the client, you might want to decide: do you put publicity in there, or do you want to put billboards in there, or do you want to put TV ads? Whatever it is, that's licensing for me in a simplified form of it. You can attach years to it. Okay, you have to use it for 3 years. After 3 years, you come back and we revisit the licensing. There's some programs out there that you can punch it in and it will give you the numbers. Personally, I would say call someone that can do that for you, because you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely. And actually, I say that we met for the first time yesterday. It's true. That's the first time we met in person. But probably about 2 years ago, we had a conversation online about, actually with a mutual friend, Francisco. He and I were talking about pricing a job and like how we would go about doing it. And you came and mentioned licensing for the first time. This is a few years ago. It's probably actually longer than 2 years now. Like COVID kind of make time fly. But realizing that there's this whole new world of kind of usage. It makes you think more about the end product. Because like you said, usage can be one thing. It could be for social media, it could be for website, it could be for billboards, it could be for magazines, it could be for print. And actually, as creatives, we think about those things when we're making the images. Okay, this image needs to be on a floor standing display. It needs to be greater than life size. We probably need to shoot at high resolution. It's going on a billboard. Okay, it's going to be a million miles away. Resolution is not super important. And you make creative choices based on the place that those things go. If it's going to be printed on matte paper, you might add more contrast in the edit. You'll do some different kind of proofing. So we're doing all this work to make sure that the thing that we're making is perfect for the application they need. But then we're not actually charging differently based on usage. Now, in the UK, the AOP recommends, that's the Association of Photographers, for people that don't know, they recommend that your creative fee includes usage for either 2 years on one platform or 2 platforms for 1 year. And it's kind of like, that's how they split it. So it's basic usage. If you don't specify, that's what somebody's going to assume based on common practice. And they provide a calculator, like you said, so there are different calculations you can use, but they don't do the hard work. Because in the end, it still relies on us as a photographer knowing the value of an individual image. Because if we don't know what our base image usage rate is, you can absolutely never work that out because you don't know the value of a photograph. And I think the interesting thing you said in the first part of your explanation is something that I definitely want to talk about, which is you don't know the value of that image to a client without researching the client. And you said get help. But can you talk a little bit about what that help looks like? How do you access help with that?
Mind shift. What happened with me is I was shooting for architects and I was doing jobs. Bigger client came along and wanted me to do work. I could have just priced it how I felt or how I've been doing it before, based on what my present needs were at the time: mortgage, car payment, health insurance. I'm in industry. Based it on that. That's good, but that doesn't get you to the next level. And that sometimes puts you in a space where you have valued your work not necessarily the right way. So I called what Lifeline, called Wonderful Machine. They are a company that helps photographers either produce the images in terms of the production side, or they will help you bid for a client. And they also are a website that hosts photographers that they have vetted that are at a certain level in their career. So you have to go through a vetting process to be on their site. But to get help from them, you can pay either a fee or you can be a member of Wonderful Machine and then call them and ask them to bid for you. So I called them, got introduced to one of their producers. He looked at my portfolio, my website, looked at the client, looked at we call the RFP, the request for proposal, and then he created an estimate for me to send to the client. When I saw that estimate, I did not know in my wildest dreams at that time that I could have ever charged that much money for my work, because I was undervaluing my work based on my present needs. But that wasn't the value. That was my need, but not the value of the work.
And I love the fact that you divorced the idea of pricing your work from what the clients you currently have can afford to pay you as well, because this is an issue that you come across all the time. I am worth X, and it's because that's the last time you managed to earn money. That's what somebody paid you. And people say, oh, you're only as good as your last job. And that can really affect you from like a psychological point of view. It can make you value yourself differently. It's insane. But having an objective third party that's essentially looking at you with dollar signs in their eyes, like, I can make money off this person. They're looking at you and thinking, right, cool, how much money can I extract from this situation? Because I want this guy to come back. I want to get him paid more so he can justify paying me. And that having that third party advocate completely changes the situation. So now that we know who they are, you were telling us the first time you used them and like how that changed your opinion. So talk a little bit more about that first job.
Yeah, so that first job, you kind of do the imposter syndrome, which we all do. You're like, wow, I'm getting paid for this and that much. Wow, this is huge. But it validates you as a person, as an artist, as a photographer, and the time you've spent. And then you realize this is my value. And now your actual whole psyche changes. After that, somebody comes to you and lowballs you with a figure. It's easy for you then to just say, here's what I'm worth. If we're willing to work, we can work, or let's negotiate from here. And now you are at a position of strength. Before, you were always holding the blade because you didn't know what your worth was. And the clients will always take advantage of that. They're never going to say, oh, let me help you out. That's not their job.
No.
So it's okay. Your job is to find out what your worth is and to charge that.
A reason why some people struggle with this is because there's a misconception that somehow an agent, which is essentially what Wonderful Machine are, they're kind of like a pay-as-you-go agency. They still have all the same acceptance criteria, but they're doing the job of a photographer's agent. They're acting on your behalf to make themselves more money. One of the things that people confuse is that actually their job is not to find you work. And I think that's the kind of missing piece of the puzzle, because if you do get to a stage where you'll know that you're worth more than you think you are, your work has got a higher value, and you're approaching a client and they're saying, yeah, no, we're not paying that. People confuse the fact that they can't afford you or don't have budget for you to say that the imagery isn't worth it. How do you get over that?
How do you get over that?
Or do you get over it, I guess?
Okay, so I'm going to backtrack just a little bit in terms of my life career. So before I started working with an architectural firm, I was doing graphic design a little bit before that. I was working as a car salesman. And I did that specifically because I didn't know how to sell. I didn't know the process of selling. I didn't know how to quantify, how to prospect, how to know which was the right lead. And then to think of sales and the rejections as plain numbers and not personal. That trips up photographers because we take it personally. It's not personal. Actually, the way we should look at it is tell me no. You go ahead and tell me no, because the stats show after 5 or 6 no's, I will get a yes. So go ahead and tell me no. Because you're only adding to the number of I will get to this point sooner. And once you start working on the data side of it and not the emotional side, it's easier for you. And I know for a fact for me to get a good lead or a good client, I have to talk to 10 people.
Yeah.
So if I want to make 2 clients, I'm going to have to talk to 20 people. It averages out. But at first, maybe 40, you will see the averages play out constantly like that. It's just data.
And I think this is the other thing as well, because part of the reason I think a lot of photographers get stuck is because they realize that isn't their skill set and then just don't do anything about it. Because it isn't mine. Like, it is not my skill set. Like, I'm terrible at picking up the phone and getting rejected. Like, it's something that I really struggle with. But again, this is where things like studio managers come in. This is where building a team around you becomes possible. And I think part of what you kind of show me is that, one, I know you don't work solo, like, but you've got a team that work with you, and the way that you divide things can save you. So can you talk a little bit about how you structure the kind of the work that you do, the photography from the kind of management, administration, sales side?
So at the beginning, it was all me. And so you have to develop that little bit of backbone and every day talk to yourself in the mirror. It's not personal. It's not personal. And you get the numbers and it'll roll on. And eventually you get to a stage where you can. So as a starting photographer, you may not be able to have that person do it for you. They may have to do it. Eventually you'll get to a stage where my wife Julie does most of that side for me. And it's actually a lot easier because emotionally she's not tied to it. And she's looking at it just from a client relationship basis and providing client benefits, also equally us. So there's no emotion attached to it. So a client says, we can't afford that. Say they come to us, they want 20 images, and Julie provides a bid, and I said, okay, we can't afford that. Instead of dropping the price, okay, so what can you afford? If it's half that, okay, still not a problem. Well, then we only do half the work.
Shrink the scope.
Yeah, it's just math, and it's just a negotiation thing. You can't afford it? Okay, so what can you afford? Okay, so we can meet here.
Yeah, and you're finding a compromise, because the fact is that very often you'll have a client that wants something, not realizing the complexity. Like, oh, we want stills and video, and we want them both to be done at the same time. Well, actually, that means double because you're paying 2 people. If you want it slower, we can potentially reduce the cost by like allowing a little bit more time and you're paying less per hour, etc., etc. But it comes with experience and knowing how long something takes, what's involved, and like you said, the client might not be aware of that. They may not know.
And so separating it first has been good in terms of dealing with clients, because when they deal with me, yes, I do say it's not emotional, but it still sometimes gets emotional, and I'll give away the house to the work because you like what you do.
Same.
So if you bring a third party in, they're not going to allow you to give away the house.
No.
Because they want to get paid.
Yeah, they want the car.
yeah, they want. So they're not the artists. Their business is to keep money and the lights on. So they'll look out for you. So somebody that can call for you, deal with the production side. Also somebody that can advocate for you legally. The first things they say in business, you should get a good accountant and a good lawyer. That is not a false statement.
It is not. A good accountant, I'd say, is first. Like, definitely. It's not just alphabetical. Get a good accountant. Get a good accountant, you'll make more money. They're worth their weight in gold. Becca, thank you. Yeah, honestly, it's one of the things that people miss. And going back to your initial point, like at the beginning, you have to do it yourself. But I think that people are really quick to outsource things like post production, like editing or retouching. But frankly, I think a lot of these business functions make way more sense
Way more sense.
because it's like left brain, right brain. Like try for me to switch from okay, I'm working on something creative to okay, now I need to cold call someone. Oh, I can't switch myself that way. And I think that it's a reason why a lot of photographers don't do marketing, they don't do PR. They rely on inbound and like one or two relationships they build to do this work for them. Or worse still, expect the portfolio to speak for itself. And I think being able to read a portfolio is a really difficult thing for a non-photographer to do. And I think you get some creative directors that are incredible at it, but trying to expect a client working in a small to medium-sized business understand your work intrinsically is not simple. And very often the clients that get it don't tend to be the ones that have the deep pockets. Like we talked about this in last week's podcast. We were talking about the idea of one for the meal and one for the real. So you do something to develop yourself creatively after you've done something to produce for somebody else that's purely a commercial endeavor.
Correct.
So how do you manage your personal work?
So personal work, interesting. Some of the things that I do personally is sometimes totally outside of architecture, and sometimes some of it is. Say we're going for a different market, say the boutique hotel market. We will actually book stays in boutique hotels and photograph them just so we can use those images in our portfolio. Sometimes you have to do that work. Not saying for beginning photographers it's going to be easy because you don't have the money to do that. So you may have to beg
for access.
Nothing wrong with that. Give them something in return. What? Give them something in return. Hey, you'll get these photos if you allow me to stay here, or even I'll pay to stay here and I'll still give you the photos.
Yeah. Just let me do it.
Let me do it. Yeah, just give me the access. So sometimes you just have to do that. And it is tough. I was able to do it because at the time when I shifted from full-time work to doing the photography, I had a backup income source. Julie was working for a huge government contractor back in DC, so we could make that shift. Some of these photographers have to do this kind of shift on their weekend and it will take longer. But yes, that is just one of the ways that you can build your portfolio. And with portfolios, I would say get a third party that can look at your portfolio and sort of help you to massage it for what you're looking for.
Because you're trying to see it from the buyer's perspective, not from the photographer's. Because I guess this is the difference. Like very often when I'm looking to try and develop my work, I'm looking at fine art for inspiration, or I'm looking at something that's not in a commercial sphere. Because the fact is that if you're only looking at your competition, you end up with a bit more of a Me Too offering. Yeah. And I think that a big part of what goes into producing the work means that we divorce ourselves from commercial elements and then bring it back and work on it. But that can end up with images that are incredibly self-indulgent. They don't really belong in your portfolio because they're not actually useful to sell anything. They're just something that you find personally pleasing. And I'm pretty good at working out the difference between those two things, but I know that it isn't everybody's skill set. And having that objective perspective is enormous.
They on my personal projects, so one of the photos that went more viral than even my commercial work was a photo that they likened my work to Annie Leibovitz. So Petapixel and F-Stoppers did an article on it, and a couple other people did an article on me shooting, funny enough, in Scotland in a castle in Duns with like 25 of my friends. And in my head, I had this vision of this group shot, but I didn't have tons of equipment. So there again, it's the photographer. Okay, this is personal work, but I want this image. How do I get this image? I had a $500 camera and an umbrella that I converted, that my wife sewed a diffusion cloth for to cover 3 speed lights, make it look like a strobe.
You had the output you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we went and popped lights and moved people and then went into Photoshop and spent hours editing till I got this commercial look that I wanted. So sometimes it's the personal work that we do that just fills our creative bellies and our minds and our hearts that we do outside of the the one that pays the bill. But we still like both, but one that just fills us our hearts differently. And I noticed that yesterday because we did this tour around Glencoe, and I was saying to you, "Hey, can we do one like this in Ireland?" Because
Definitely.
it was so like, oh, I feel energized about taking photos again instead of just doing it for work.
And I think that's part of what I do with the education offering that we do. It's called visual identity because I feel like people, they need scope to experiment to produce a new product. It's like research and development. If you don't do the research, eventually your company will be replaced by a company that is. If you think about yourself like a tech company, for example, Microsoft is no longer like in the dominant position that it used to be in terms of operating systems for devices because they missed mobile. And they missed that because they were so focused on their first offering. There's a principle that I can't remember the guy's name. He was a Harvard business professor, and he wrote a book on radical disruption. And the idea was that companies that innovate quickly tend to also forget how to innovate because they kind of develop a creative process and they get stuck in it and it never changes. And as a result, you end up with situations like Microsoft now becoming a cloud services company and not an operating system company. Because that switch has to happen, but they missed out on this generation that happened in the middle. And as photographers, I don't think it makes sense to follow every trend, but if you're not doing that development work, it can be so damaging.
Yeah. And as you said, you have to be careful of which trend in the photography world you decide to place your hat on, because some of them are a little faddish and some of them go away. So you have to decide how you want to approach that.
That's it. And knowing your own brand values helps you to decide those things. Like, I can't imagine you shooting an interior with direct flash, for example. You're not going to do it. And you're also not going to introduce motion blur into your photographs. And it's not because you don't like the way those things look. It's just, it does not fit with the personality that you're putting forward for your work. If you took that to your agent, I'm pretty sure, like, yeah, this isn't you. We're not selling this.
Yeah.
With that said, like, we've covered a lot in a fucking short space of time. So aside from talking about planning the trip to Ireland, like we need to kind of, I want to do a little bit more work kind of pointing people towards your stuff. So can you tell people where they can find your work? Where can they look to see the kind of stuff you've done?
Simply on our website, barryharley.com. Of course, on Wonderful Machine, you can find some of our work. So if you just Google that, you will see all of our. We are one of I remember, not a lot, but few Marriott vendors that are now exclusively being used to photograph their properties, North America and around the world. So most likely, if you've stayed at one of the Marriott brands, you might have seen some of our work also. But barryharley.com is the easiest way to see our work and
The Oracle.
yeah, that's it right there.
And the last thing I want to do is end on some practical advice. So for anybody that's a new entrant into photography, let's say they're just transitioning into commercial work. Either they've been in education or they've been teaching themselves, they're making their first forays. Can you give somebody some advice starting out? What should they be doing to make sure they've set a fine foundation for the business side?
Okay, so first of all, create a business. Don't do it on the personal name or in terms of create a company.
Like a legal entity.
A legal entity. Because when something happens, they can only go after legal entity. And then if you could decide to, so that's probably first, even before you decide to go develop.
And there's some lawyers, like you said.
Yeah, and your skill of photography. Do the business side first. I would say it's more important to learn the business side first before the craft. Yes, photographers say, what? Yeah, because it's still money, still a business. If you want to do something for charity or you want to do a nonprofit, that's fine. But if you're going into this for a business, then approach it like any other business. After that, I would say define who you want to shoot for. At the beginning, most of us don't. We shoot. Not there's anything wrong with shooting weddings or shooting babies or doing those things. That's something that's fine if that's what you want to do.
And it's not commercial. That's direct to consumer.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a B, what they in the US say B2C instead of B2B.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, that's fine.
Yeah.
Define who that client is. If you're shooting weddings, go for weddings. Create your wedding style. If you want to shoot for real estate, create that style. If you're shooting for interiors, create that style. Don't shoot for weddings, babies, the interiors, the hotel, the food, because you're only going to get a very low end of the market that will use you because you're not specified. Once you get more specialized, you will notice the client change. A couple of things that will change also, not that you can't shoot people and interiors at the same time. Because I did get a comment early on in my career, only show your interiors and my architectural work. And when I went and did some personal work and people saw the personal work, now the agents are saying, why aren't you showing that work also on your site? So sometimes you can mix them, but I'm not going to show weddings and baby photos on my site. One of my little sayings is, I'm an interior luxury hotel and architect photographer. My mantra is no weddings, no babies.
When I made the transition from wedding photography into commercial, the second that I took wedding images off the website, I started booking more. Because I know it does sound silly. It does sound silly. You'd expect a client to be able to see a beautiful image of one subject matter. They can do that with somebody in running shoes, or they could do it with somebody wearing t-shirts. But people don't have to do that. The point is, there's somebody else that's going to be more specific. There's going to be a better solution to their problem. So they never ever reach out. And it's not because your work isn't good. It's a presentation problem.
Right. So I would say being specified in what you do is probably the second thing to decide. And then go and create that style. Now learn the technical side.
To fulfill that.
Yeah.
You see, that this is one of the interesting things. We kind of come full circle here, because you started out with the commercial, the business element, knowing the application. You developed a product for other people and the skills to kind of bring it to fruition, and you can see where you've got to. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate your time, Barry. Thanks again for being on.
Good.
I guess we need to start planning a trip to Ireland.
That's right.